begrijpt dat ik erg benieuwd ben of dit lukt. Hey!
Uh-oh.
It works!
It's a good thing I'm out of my underwear.
I think you knew I'd be calling, Charles.
Yes, I did.
Thank you so much for joining us here on Skype. We have a full hall and... Hello! I don't dare turn the computer around to show you everybody, but we are all here and listening and thrilled that you're joining us. Thank you so much. Charles, I wanted to start off with something about myself. The title of your book is The Happy City, Transforming Our Lives Through Urban Design. And I am myself living proof of your hypothesis that urban design can transform our lives. I grew up in Los Angeles, but I ended up living in Amsterdam, putting down roots here, after I saw how different the life is that you lead in a compact city like this with bikes and public transportation and an urban constellation in which you meet people on the street. But one of your conclusions in your book is that what really matters in the long run for our happiness are social connections. So what's more important, the hardware or the software?
Well, they're both important. They're both important. And I think I should answer that by telling you about the start of my journey. The journey really began for me in Bogota, Colombia, where on a bike ride with the former mayor of that city, Enrique Peñalosa. And it's interesting to contrast his style and his mission with another mayor in that city. So the previous mayor was named Antanas Mocus, a brilliant guy. He was head of the National University until the day that he was so irritated by students he pulled his pants down on stage. They fired him, and so he headed into politics. His argument was that we can teach ourselves to be better citizens, to be more connected, to be better people. And so he embarked on a process of education through example. He would dress up in a super citizen suit and run around the city. He ensured that the government was more honest. He sent mimes out into the streets to make fun of rude people. And it worked to some extent. But by the end of his term, the city was still a mess. It was still violent. It was still unfair. And Peñalosa, his argument was, it's not good enough to try to think differently, because we are so affected by the environment around us. We also have to create a city that respects everyone. And so what he did was transformed the design of that city to make it more fair, to show to citizens that the city cared about them all equally, not just if you were rich enough to own a car, for example. So schools, parks, bike lanes, a transit system that took all the best road space away from cars and gave it to people who are willing to take the bus.
And Peñalosa is no longer mayor of Bogota.
No. Well, consecutive terms are illegal in Colombia. And so he agreed to support Mocus in Mocus' second term if Mocus followed through with Peñalosa's program. Now, nobody was surveying for happiness or subjective well-being at the time in Colombia, but what we did see is a massive spike in optimism, people's feelings about their own lives and the future of the city during his term.
How is it that does having social connections, being part of a social network, does that really make us trust other people more?
Well, I actually would like to turn the question around, and the reason I talk so much about trust is because trust, do you trust your neighbors, do you trust other people in the city, is actually a pretty good proxy for, or a way to assess whether we have strong social connections. So the goal isn't to build trust. The goal is to build social connections, because there is no more powerful ingredient of human happiness than strong, positive social connections. And trust is a way to measure that. So can we design trust into our cities? Well, the starting point is to see how we have designed trust and social relations out of our cities, particularly in North America. And there are very straightforward examples of this. People who live on the ex-urban edge, people who have to drive a long way, people who depend on their cars to get around in any particular neighborhood. The more your life and neighborhood suits that model, the less likely surveys show you knowing your neighbors, trusting your neighbors, and even having dinner with friends and family.
So people never run into people they know on the street because everyone's either in their own car or shut up inside their own house.
One of the saddest stories I encountered was during my time with super commuters in California. These are people who had to drive 4 hours a day to get to work and back. And they did it because they had been pushed out of central cities. And these were nice people, good people, hardworking, friendly. And I remember asking one of them, Randy, how do you like your neighbors? And he scowled at me and he goes, you can't trust these people. And I said, well, how many have you met? And the truth is he had met none of them because he got up before dawn and he came home after dark.
And why had he willingly moved out to the edges of the city like this?
Well, as you'll recall, 2008 was the year of the mortgage crisis in the United States. And so he got a very hot deal on a beautiful new house because he bought it from someone who had lost the house. I should also say that American cities, and this may be true in some places in Europe as well, because of anti-development forces who call themselves green, there's no room for people in some of the central cities, particularly around San Francisco. People won't allow for more development, so everybody with limited means had to move out.
And only the elite is able to stay in the city center.
That's right.
I was fascinated by the chapter in your book where you go to Disneyland and start looking at how the designers of Disneyland seem to have found a recipe for making everybody walk around with a smile on their face. And you actually had a hilarious experiment at Disneyland where you walked up to complete strangers at Disneyland and started hugging them. And also when you presented your book at the Guggenheim Museum in November, you had a great big hugging party. And there are fantastic pictures of this hugging party on your site, www.thehappycity.com. So what did you actually learn at Disneyland?
Well, I think there are two parts to this story. One is that my research and then my events have been hacked by a neuroeconomist named Paul Zak. So Paul has done work for years into the economics, the neuroeconomics of trust. In other words, unlike other economists who just create theories based on the way they think the world should work, Paul takes samples of people's blood after they've engaged in various encounters. And what he's found is that if you engage in trust-building encounters, you have more oxytocin in your blood. And oxytocin is the hormone that makes women feel warm and fuzzy after giving birth. It's the hormone that makes us like and trust each other more. So I was going down to interview Paul Zak, and of course I wanted to connect his work to cities. And I said, well, is there anywhere we can meet, on the street where we can test your theories? And he said, I live in Southern California. It's all cars, man. And so he came to Disneyland with me, and it was really remarkable. You arrive on Main Street, USA, and you get this sense of calm and trust and comfort. And other neuroscientists have explained it's the architecture that does it. It's the landscape that does it. The buildings are shrunk to 5/8 size. They feel like toys. They look like a beautiful imagined past. But there are also no cars on that street. So we decided to test Paul's theories and see if people were amenable. We hugged people a lot. Yeah.
Did they hug you back?
They did, but I was a little concerned at the end of it because Disneyland tells you long before you arrive that you should be happy when you get there. Yeah. So I felt, they were biased subjects. We're all kids when we arrive at Disneyland. So I wanted to test it in a more laboratory-like setting.
And were you able to distill from Disneyland a recipe that urbanists in other places can use?
Well, they're already doing it all over North America. Designs, forms, retro forms, and also car-free or slow streets are being adopted. Of course, what you don't see in those pictures of Disneyland are the vast parking lots surrounding the park. So it's still part of this incredibly dispersed city. People from Southern California told me they go to Disneyland because they think of it as their downtown. Imagine that, driving 2 hours and paying $50 to get in your downtown. Really sad.
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because one of the criticisms now of the historic city center of Amsterdam is that it's become so touristy that it's starting to feel like a theme park, where when you buy a parking ticket to park your car, that's actually your entrance ticket to the theme park.
Well, you could take transit in, of course, but I know what you're saying. It's happening to all the great and beautiful cities around the world, and that's why I think there are efforts in many of our cities in North America to retrofit our suburbs, to try to bring to this dispersed city, this disconnected city, more opportunities to connect and to walk, and it's happening. It's happening on dead mall spaces. People are getting together to, working with developers, of course, to find new ways to build suburbs. And we have to do it, because there is no room left in city centers.
And will this work, or will these places be just as fake as Disneyland? These newly created
I think it depends on the model. Yeah, it depends on the model. On the one hand, some malls will redevelop, and they'll give you what looks like a downtown, what looks like a main street, and yet you're not free there because it's not municipal land. However, some municipalities in the United States, in Denver, they've done it, where they've converted a dead mall into a proper town center with housing, with business. I mean, you're in Amsterdam, you know what a functioning city looks like. This is what they're building, but they're ensuring that the streets remain public property.
So these are actually microcosms within this sea of dispersed city, as you so eloquently call it. But
yeah,
still,
well,
but still better than nothing, no?
Pardon me?
But still better than nothing.
Well, I think it's great. You know, there's a false debate happening, at least on this side of the water, between cities and suburbs. And you have people lined up on either side, battling each other. And the truth is, there isn't room for everybody in central cities, and most people actually don't want to live there.
That was one of the arguments of Bob Brugman in his book about sprawl. He said that's why sprawl became so popular in the U.S. is because this is what people like. They like having easy parking space. They like having big houses, and this is the consequence.
Well, you know, he's full of... Oh, I can't say that on Skype, can I? But it's Amsterdam, so I can. Look, one thing is very clear, is that suburban sprawl, whether it's in North America or in Europe, is not at all a naturally occurring phenomenon. It's supported by massive subsidization of highways. In North America, you have mortgage subsidies. No, it was a decision made by policymakers, just like retrofits would be a decision. So my point is that a lot of people don't want to live with high density, and they don't have to. If we retrofit some of our suburbs in a way that appeals to people, and then a way that provides enough dense town centers that the people who always want to live in a McMansion, they can. They always will be able to. They'll be there. But at least there'll be opportunities for people who want to live a little bit closer and a little bit more connected.
I was curious about your thoughts on the influence of the crisis on happiness in the city, because we know that unemployment and lack of money are great causes of tension and depression. But at the same time, they seem to be, the crisis seems to be forcing us to find new sources of creativity within ourselves, and also to find new forms of cooperation with others. People, you know, there are a lot more local neighborhood initiatives. People are taking not only their own lives, but their own physical environments into their own hands. And as we heard from Paul Schnabel, the previous speaker, having a grip on your own life is part of what makes you happy.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I did much of my research following the crash in North America and elsewhere in the world. And although I'm impressed with the policymakers, the mayors and engineers who are trying to rebuild cities in the name of happiness, and they are, my heroes are those people who stopped waiting and started doing it themselves. You know, one story that moved me deeply was a story of a fellow named Jan Semenza. He was a Swedish epidemiologist who found himself in the United States, and he found in his work looking at public health that people tend to die more often when they are lonely and disconnected. It's one of the greatest public health risks there is. And he spent years kind of wandering around the U.S., wondering how he could bridge this disconnection gap. He was a sad guy until he arrived in Portland in the U.S. West, and he noticed in a neighborhood in that city, some neighbors had decided to turn their intersection, their local intersection, into a piazza. And they just marched out and they painted this intersection. And of course, a city official arrived one day and said, "You can't do that. That's public space. No one's allowed to use it." Good. So you're laughing. That means you understand how ridiculous that statement is. They eventually prevailed. And it was so successful that people like Jan built a piazza on his own intersection, but he also got his students to study the effects. And what they found is whenever people work together to turn their intersection into a piazza or to build common space in their community, the design helped. Uh-oh.
No, we're okay.
Hello?
Yes, we're okay.
Okay. Whenever we're together, is that me?
You're back.
I still see you.
I still see you. I'm holding you
tight. Well, let's just hold on. Onto each other. What happened? I'm feeling disconnected from you.
I think we're back. Keep going.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Jan found that whenever people worked together to create these neighborhood centers, these points of connection, they created a blast radius of positive psychological health in the neighborhood. People slept better. They found life easier to get through. They found more meaning in their lives. Crime went down. And also, there was this resilience effect. Some of them didn't have jobs, but they realized they could all trade things with one another. They all found life actually getting cheaper.
So in that sense, the crisis may actually ultimately have a positive effect on our happiness.
Well, the interesting thing is that subjective did dip in the United States during the crisis, but it came back to previous levels long before the economic recovery.
Well, that's happy news for today. And another city guru that you discussed in your book is the Danish Jan Gehl. And he was actually one of the very first people who realized the importance of interaction in public space, or maybe not even interaction, but just being with other people, even if you didn't talk to them or interact with them in a public space. How can we translate his insights into the retrofitting of our cities now?
Well, it's happening. It's happening all over. I think the remarkable thing about Gehl's work is that he said, if you don't study how people move and interact, then you'll never build or design for it. And for years, we've been building and designing for, I don't know, economic impact or particularly movement of automobiles. So when Jan Gehl started sitting on the streets in Copenhagen and in other cities and watching how people moved, we started to get data on how many people a sidewalk can handle, for example. You know, just a couple of years ago, after years of angst in New York City about traffic congestion, automobile congestion, Jan Gehl showed up and studied sidewalk activity, and he said, don't you realize that congestion is much worse on your sidewalks than in your streets? We need to make more room for pedestrians. So now we have a pedestrianized Times Square, finally, where pedestrians outnumber cars and always have something like 5 to 1.
Fantastic.
Incidentally, one stat of Jan's I really love is he looked at activity in front yards in Denmark and Canada and found that if you watch how people interact with strangers in their front yard, you can devise the ideal front yard depth. And apparently it's just over 3 meters deep. So everyone should bear that in mind when thinking about your home location. If your front yard is far too deep, then you won't be able to interact with passing strangers. If it's too shallow, you'll shy away from them. So what we all want is those superficial conversations about the weather with passing strangers, and this will facilitate it.
One last question, Charles. I've been interested myself in the impact of social media like Facebook on our interactions with other people. There's now a sort of in-between layer of interaction in the city between people with whom we share tools, for example, or sites we go to find a babysitter. And we don't know these people, but they're in our circle somehow. Do you have any thoughts on how all these new forms of interaction through the web will influence the way we actually interact in physical space?
Actually, I'm coming at it from the other direction. I'm seeing the design of our cities integral to the success of sharing. If you look at car or bike share systems, at any one time, if you're in your own city and if you have a car or bike share system, and you look online and try to locate a vehicle, let's say in New York City, all those bikes are down in Midtown or in downtown Manhattan in the middle of the day, and they're all gone at the end of the day. It's the same in my city with car share, with Car2Go. And I realize unless we aggressively try and mix up uses in our neighborhoods, then it's always going to be hard for me to find a car if I want to use one. So would it be so bad in this day where most industry and work doesn't involve toxic fumes and noise, would it be so bad for me to have a business next door, an office next door, some way to turn our cities in into much more balanced systems where people are moving back and forth across the sharing network?
Is Vancouver a happy city, Charles? Yeah.
Trick question. Compared to other Canadian cities, we don't fare well compared to the smaller, poorer cities. And this is something I think people in the Netherlands should consider as well. People tend to be happier in small towns where I think commutes are shorter and it's easier to connect with people. So maybe you all need to move out to Houghton. Okay, it's a little dull out there. But so all I know is I'm happy here because I'm a mountain person. And I'm happy to see you.
And I'm happy our connection held, and I'm happy you were here, and I'm going to hold up your book. This is Charles' book, and it's really good. Thank you very much. Charles Montgomery, the author of The Happy City.
Do I get my Skype hug?
Skype hug. Hey. Thanks so much.
Great.
Talk to you later.
Talk to you.
Okay, bye-bye. It worked.